Morning, welcome back to the channel. In this video I want to talk a little bit and have a little reflection on my thoughts about the film Shallow Grave that I watched last night. I watched that back in I think 1994 when it first came out, and I was impressed with it. Really good film, and I've not watched it since, so it's like over 30 years later. Unbelievable, really. But it's a classic film by Danny Boyle, and like I say, it was I think 1994 that it came out. I think I saw it that year. It was 2 years prior to Trainspotting coming out, and I think in a lot of ways Trainspotting overshadows this. It's a bit of a hidden gem, I think, Shallow Grave, which is a shame because I think it's an excellent film, and personally I prefer it to Trainspotting. But yeah, it's good. So what did I think? It's pretty heavy. Feels like a gun. Not that I'd know. Been watching too many horror films. Yeah, it stars Ewan McGregor's in it, obviously. He plays Alex. We've got Kerry Fox, who's playing Juliet, and there's Christopher Ecclestone playing David. By the way, there's going to be spoilers in this video. This is loaded with spoilers. If since 1994 you still haven't watched the film, you don't want it to be spoiled, don't watch this video. Pause it, watch it, and then come back. If you've seen the film, not a problem. As you were, carry on. So yeah, those three main characters I just mentioned, they're the three protagonists. It's got a few other people in it, a few kind of bad guys, and Keith Allen is in it too. But it's a fairly small cast, really. But just to sort of remind you how the story goes in a nutshell, it's not a particularly complicated story. The story basically, in a nutshell, is there are three flatmates, and it begins with them advertising for and interviewing for a fourth flatmate because there's a spare room. You don't really know. They never explain why there's a spare room, if there was somebody before, whatever. It doesn't really get explained. And also, one thing it doesn't really talk about is do they collectively rent or own that flat? It's quite splendid, really. Spacious, massive rooms, huge ceilings. It doesn't really explain whether they rent or own it. And I think there is... I guess it doesn't really matter, but it kind of does matter. I'll explain that later. And they interview this guy, a few people. There's one guy called Colin, and Alex is really obnoxious. He's not a very nice person. He's pretty horrible to people, a bit stuck up, a bit too self-assured and quite arrogant. And he basically is really rude to this Colin guy, and they get rid of him. They don't want him moving in with them. And he's actually really rude to him again a bit later in the film when they're at an event. But Colin has the last laugh, and it's kind of it's weird. I almost cheer the moment when Colin follows Alex into the toilets with a couple of other heavies, and basically does him in a toilet cubicle. He takes a good pasting there. So Colin does have the last laugh. And on that note, Alex, Ewan McGregor's character, does take quite a bit of damage in this film. So he takes that pasting in the toilet cubicle I've just mentioned. He also he gets his shins smacked with a crowbar, which is pretty nasty. That's by a couple of intruders who come into the house looking for the money later on. He also gets drilled slightly in the forehead by David's character. He's got an electric drill, which draws blood. And perhaps worst of all, towards the end, he gets a good stabbing through the shoulder from Juliet. Having said all of that, he does, you assume, survive all of this damage, and at the end of the film, he's still alive. And you assume that he is going to make off with the cash. He's kind of having the last laugh. So that's a bit of a weird thing for me. He's like an obnoxious guy who's not very nice throughout the film, but he has the last laugh. He gets away with the money, you assume. David's. Just while I'm on the topic of David's, I was reading something recently in The Guardian that made me laugh, that was basically saying, if you call David and you're in a horror film, you're basically going to die. You know, Davids don't live long. They tend to get knocked off. There's a few examples they give. There's David in The Lost Boys, played by Kiefer Sutherland. He gets it at the end. The David in American Werewolf in London obviously doesn't make it, although he gets a lot of screen time in the process, has to be said. David, played by Dylan Moran in Shaun of the Dead, obviously doesn't make it. There's loads of others, and the article's quite funny. And then it went on to say, if you're a Holly, it's even worse. You know, you're really going to die, and don't be called Dick either, because they don't make it. Funny. Anyway, so Shallow Grave is quite a dark film, and I think if you step back afterwards and think about it, it's exploring a few things. Issues around greed, issues around trust. Those two are fairly intrinsic in the film. and actually exposes how I think we're all so corruptible by money, and it takes that to an extreme with all the kind of torture and death that happens within this film. There's a few things I read about in terms of goofs. One of them is at the end when Juliet stabs Alex, she kind of takes quite a small knife and stabs him in like the shoulder, and then a bit later on she pushes it in further, and you see it not going through his body and actually coming out of this floorboard beneath him. There's a bit of blade sort of extending there, and people are pointing out that it wasn't that long. It wasn't like a 30 centimetre blade, it was much shorter. So, but they're minor things. I didn't pick up on that. I just read it and thought, didn't spoil my viewing, but I guess, inconsistent a bit. What else? Oh yeah, so David's busy drilling holes when he's going a bit mad, and he's upstairs in the attic, and he's drilling his little peephole so he can keep an eye on what's going on below. And then you see lots of shots of the ceilings later on from below after he's drilled those holes, and you don't really see any holes. And they're quite big holes because you see all the light flying up into the attic. And then there's one thing about someone moaning that one of the intruders, when they get into the attic and they're looking for the money, he kind of stumbles through the dark, and he sort of instinctively knows to put his hand around one of the beams and hit the light switch. And people said, well, he wouldn't know that's there. He's never been in that attic. How would he know there's a light switch around somewhere he's never seen? But again, I'm willing to let that go. They're not major problems, really. Maybe he was just hoping. And anyway, the film has got a fair bit of violence in it. There's some shocking scenes, a bit harrowing. It's not for the faint-hearted. So when David has drawn the short straw and has to hack off Hugo, played by Keith Allen's hands and feet, and then smash in his teeth so there's no dental records left with a hammer. You don't obviously see that, but you kind of see him, a silhouette of him in the woods there, doing it, looking really aggrieved. I like the transformation of his character. He goes from someone who's fairly quiet and meek, the quietest of the three, and then he transforms into someone who's completely tortured and capable of more violence through his traumatic experiences. So as I said at the beginning, I actually prefer Shallow Grave to the more commercially renowned Train Spotting. And it's obviously on a smaller budget. I think I even read they had to sell some of the props whilst they were making the film in order to raise money to complete the film. That's crazy, isn't it? But yeah, back to the violence. It is violent. There's lots of death in it. There's like a drowning scene. There's various torture scenes. It's pretty hard hitting actually. But I do have questions like at the end of the film. So as I mentioned before, why they never really explain what happened before this housemate arrives at the start. I don't suppose they have to, but I was interested. Like, did the person before die, or did they drive them out because they were a very tight clique at the start? Those three. What's the deal with that, and do they own that flat or not? Because the reason I'm interested in that is at the end when you see Alex lying on the floor with the knife pinning him to the floor, you assume he's going to make it, even though he's lost a lot of blood, and that he has hidden the money. He's switched the money. Juliet's got basically an empty suitcase. Well, actually, it's full of like guff newspaper, isn't it? But he switched the money, so it's under the floorboards. Only he knows it's there, and if he owns that house, he can access it. But what happens if he doesn't? I don't know. I was a bit worried about that. Also, they don't really know how Hugo dies. He moves in and then he's instantly dead the next day. You assume a drug overdose. You're not sure. They find some drugs. You assume that's how he's made all of this cash as well. But they never really explore that. I don't suppose they really need to. But yeah, let's go with a drug overdose. I think that's the most likely, although it's never really alluded to. And also, towards the end of the film, Juliet seems to give in to David, who throughout the film has shown that he has feelings for Juliet. And you wonder, I was kind of wondering, does Juliet also like David, or was she just playing him? I suspect the latter, maybe, that she was just trying to formulate her escape plan, and she figured siding with David was maybe her best bet, although it does all unravel at the end. I love the way it unravels. They're all trying to get out, and they're all basically turning on each other. There's a pretty good three-way fight scene in their flat. Yeah, towards the end, they're all starting to get paranoid and trying to formulate how they're going to escape this, because the police detective inspector, who I think is amazing, played by Ken Stott, is onto them, and they know it, and he's been around to interview them all separately. There's a really good moment where he's saying to Alex, would it surprise you if I told you that the two dead guys that they discovered recently, if their car was parked outside your house, would it surprise you? And it really catches Alex out, and he's like, yeah. And then he's like, why is it? And the detective's just like, he doesn't really let him know or not. It's a great little technique for trying to get someone to admit guilt, spill the beans. So it's a good moment, that. Yeah, it's a great film. Loved it. Definitely worth watching. It is pretty violent, so just bear that in mind. And I watched it on Blu-ray. There it is. There's a few different versions of this. Like, you know, with a lot of films, there's lots of different covers you can get depending on whether you've bought it on DVD or Blu-ray, and whether it's a special edition, and there's some other kind of European versions. I might, if I can be bothered, put some of these up on the screen as I'm talking about this. But this one's a little bit boring with just the spade in the woods. I know it's descriptive of kind of what happens, but I personally prefer to see the people, the protagonists on a cover. And I noticed some of them do have that. So this is not the best cover, I don't think. However, it says it's the Blu-ray version with some, what does it say? It's got some extras. I've not watched those. Interesting. I wonder what they are. Let's have a little look on the back. Might be time for me to get the trusty magnifying glass with light. Special features, it says, Digging Your Own Grave, BBC documentary, directed by Kevin MacDonald. It's got a commentary with Danny Boyle himself, the director. It's got something called Danny Boyle on Shallow Graves, talking about the film. And it's also got, presumably another audio track, which is Ewan McGregor on Shallow Grave. So yeah, good film. It's an 18, came out in 1994. It's got some good twists and turns, this film. I assume you already know if you're watching this, otherwise I've completely spoiled it for you. In which case, I'm sorry, but I did give you a little spoiler warning at the very beginning. So thanks for watching the video. I hope you found it interesting. Put your comments in below. You know, if you can answer any of those questions that I had, if I'd missed something, stick the answers down there and I'll have a look. So anyway, see you next time. Bye for now.